So chapter 19 is about the respiratory system, and we'll start looking at the respiratory system by discussing a little bit about what respiration is, and then looking at the organs of the respiratory tract and the passageways of the respiratory tract. So respiration is the exchange of gas, and by gases I'm talking here about CO2 and oxygen, the two major gases that are needed, that's what oxygen is, needed to make ATP, and then the waste gas material from ATP production. It's the exchange of these gases between the atmosphere and the cells. And so the events of respiration, the activities of respiration, include ventilation or breathing, which is the process of moving air into and out of the lungs and getting air down into those lungs passageways so that we can bring fresh oxygen in, and then squeezing that air back out again so that we can get the carbon dioxide out of the body. Then external respiration, which is when we exchange gases between the external environment, the air, and the blood of the internal environment of the body. So external respiration is oxygen and carbon dioxide exchange between air and blood. And then we got to move that freshly, oxygenated and decarbon dioxygenated, if that's a word, we got to move that blood out to the peripheral tissues of the body, where internal respiration can occur. Internal respiration is when we exchange gases from the blood in the capillaries out to and back into the blood to the cells out here in the peripheral tissues. And then last of all is cellular respiration. So this is a cell here. Cellular respiration is the actual processes, all the chemical reactions that use oxygen and glucose to make ATP. And all of that occurs then at the mitochondria. So when we use that term respiration, we have to be careful. We got to recognize what we're talking about. It's not just the processes of ventilating the lungs or just exchanging gases between the blood and the air, or the air and the fluids around the peripheral tissues, but it also includes that process of making ATP using the oxygen that we brought to the cells, and then getting rid of the CO2 that is a waste product of that process. So the functions of the respiratory system then include providing a really large surface area that allows for this gas exchange, and there is a huge amount of surface area inside the lungs that allows that allows that exchange. The respiratory membrane, we talk about that gas exchange surface, is very large. And then we have to move air to and from the gas exchange surfaces there between the blood and the air. We have to protect those respiratory surfaces from invading pathogens. So, we can easily breathe in viruses or bacteria that can then cause disease. And we also have to protect the respiratory surface from drying out, because if it becomes dry, it will not allow gas exchange, and from freezing, because really, really cold air can damage the respiratory membranes. And then there are some additional functions of allowing auditory communication. We can talk, sing, do whatever, using our voice. There is a function in assisting smell. And while we're not going to get very far into it in this chapter, we will get deeper into this when we get to the acid-base balance chapter. But breathing is involved in regulating the pH of blood and other body fluids. So we will get there, but just not in this chapter. So what organs are involved in the respiratory system? Of course, we have the nose. And, ideally, you're bringing air to your lungs through the nose. We'll we'll talk about why that's ideal in just a second. The nose is supported by the nasal bone, and then there are internal bones, the vomer, the perpendicular process of the ethmoid bone, so on. There are bony parts in the interior of the nose as well. And we have larger or coarse hairs, guard hairs, that act to help slow down air as it enters the nostrils and to collect the large particulate stuff that might be in the air. I know if I'm working in my wood shop and I'm making a lot of wood dust, man, my nose will capture quite a bit of that wood dust. It's like I'm blowing a tree out of my nose almost. The nostrils are the openings into the nose, sometimes referred to as the external nares. There's also an internal nares, that's this passageway back here in the pharynx, that whereas the air is passing from the nasal cavity and into the pharynx. So the nasal cavity itself is divided into a right and left side by the nasal septum, and it is lined with pseudostratified ciliated epithelium. So remember, pseudostratified, that means that all the cells are connected to a basement membrane, but not all of them have a surface up there, have their apical surface out there at the external environment. And this pseudostratified ciliated epithelium is a mucous membrane, and so the moist mucus warms and humidifies the air and helps, the sticky mucus helps to trap particles that might be in the air. And there are cilia on this pseudostratified ciliated epithelium that will wave the mucus and any contaminants that it may contain, wave that stuff right on down to the pharynx and help push it toward the esophagus, where the digestive enzymes and the acids in the stomach and further on will take care of destroying any of those materials. Inside of the nasal cavity are the nasal conchae, and so this is a hard K sound here. And remember, as always, AE says E, so these are the nasal conchae, also sometimes referred to as the turbinates. And these are on the lateral walls of the nasal cavity. So what we're seeing as we see the nasal conchae here is the far right hand nasal cavity, the right half of the nasal cavity, and we're looking at the lateral wall there. And these protrusions are also covered with, they're bony protrusions, and they are covered with that pseudostratified ciliated epithelium and all the mucus. And so they stick out into the air passageways, and they slow down the air. They cause turbulent flow of the air, which helps to increase the efficiency of the warming and the moistening of that air. So it creates little eddies of air. Oops, sorry about that. Creates little eddies of air that allow keep the air into contact with that mucous membrane for longer, so that we get lots of good warming and conditioning of that air, moistening of the air. So then the sinuses are cavities in the skull. They serve there as a means of reducing the weight of the skull. So you can see the sphenoidal sinus here, the frontal sinus up here above the eyes, and there are other sinuses in the maxilla as well, and they make the skull lighter, and they are lined with mucous membrane as well, and so they're constantly producing secretions that help to warm and moisten the air, and those secretions drain into the nasal cavity. It looks like there's no connection between the nasal cavity and these sinuses, but there is a connection between the sinuses. I've drawn them here. There's another sinus. You can see the maxillary sinuses here. So they connect back to the nasal cavity, and the fluids in them will drain into the nasal cavity and down the pharynx and into the esophagus, so that we can remove all that. And they also aid in warming and moistening the air. And along the way, they act as resonating chambers so that our voice takes on warmer tones and more complexity in the sound. So people with amazing singing voices have, by the luck of their genes or development, they have resonances in their nasal cavities that are especially attractive to us. The pharynx, we've talked about that before with the digestive system. It's that common passageway that air, liquids, and solid food all have to pass through. And it's divided into three different regions. There's the nasopharynx, which is the portion of the pharynx that's up toward the nasal cavity. There's the oropharynx, the portion of it that is associated with the back of the mouth. And the laryngopharynx, which is the portion there right above the larynx. Okay, so that was the upper respiratory tract that we just looked at. Now we're moving into the lower respiratory tract. That's everything from the laryngopharynx downward, so it's oral cavity and below, or below the oral cavity. Excuse me. It is also lined with mucous membrane that has cilia, that pseudostratified ciliated epithelium. But now the cilia, rather than waving downward toward the pharynx, are waving upward toward the pharynx. And we actually describe that as a ciliary elevator that moves any of the trapped particles upward to the pharynx so that we can swallow it. And again, the acids and enzymes of the stomach will then take care of those materials. So we'll start with the larynx. The larynx is the enlarged passageway for air movement into and out of the trachea. So we're looking at it here from the anterior. This is here's the pharynx here. Here is the larynx, and this is the laryngopharynx. Excuse me. It's attached to the hyoid bone, so you can see little bits of the hyoid bone here. Remember, that's that horseshoe that circles around. And it's composed of muscle and cartilages that are all bound together with other connective tissues. Three major cartilages: the thyroid cartilage, that is and it's cut here and also cut here, that wraps around the front of it's on the anterior surface of the larynx, and then wraps around to the posterior. And it is what we think of as the Adam's apple, just underneath the thyroid gland. And men have a larger thyroid cartilage than women do. And it's part of what gives us a lower voice, is that our larynx is longer. The cricoid cartilage is the most inferior of the cartilages. And here we are looking at it now. This is from the side. So here's the anterior surface. And the epiglottic cartilage is the core of the epiglottis. So here's the epiglottic cartilage. And then there are other cartilages as well, but those are the three most important ones. So now we're looking down the pharynx at the glottis. The glottis is the opening into the larynx. So here the glottis is open, here the glottis is closed. And of course the epiglottis is this area right here. The epiglottis is that flap of tissue that, as we swallow it, it folds over and sends the food backward toward the esophagus, which is back here. And that helps to prevent food and water from getting breathed in. The vocal folds are two pairs of muscle and connective tissue that kind of fold to obscure or to close the glottis. The false vocal cords are the ones that will actually close over the glottis. The true vocal cords, they are the ones that vibrate. So here's false vocal cords right here. Here are the true vocal cords. They produce the vocal sounds. And if you have not seen the video of Steven Tyler's vocal cords doing their thing, I encourage you to go to YouTube and just do a search for Steven Tyler's, how does he spell it? No, it's a V. Steven Tyler's vocal cords. There's about a 10-minute video that's taken from a longer video of that is made by National Geographic, and they actually insert a camera down his throat. You can watch his vocal folds, the true vocal cords, fluttering against each other as he's singing and talking, and they talk about some research that they were doing using him as a subject. It's really fascinating. I encourage you to do that. Okay, so from the larynx, then, air passes down into the trachea. It's a tough, flexible tube that brings air to the lungs. It passes through the mediastinum, and it's supported and held open by cartilage rings. So the rings wrap around, they're kind of C-shaped. So that's where the cartilage rings are found, and they hold the airways open. But at the back side, here, notice that there's no cartilage. This is because the esophagus is here, kind of slumped closed, but as we swallow large chunks of food, it can kind of bulge open to allow the large food stuff to pass through the esophagus, and it bulges in where there is no cartilage there. And if we are, if there's a blockage in the trachea, then a tracheostomy is a slice that is made to allow a tube to be placed in there so that air can come in and out of the lungs through a different opening than through the pharynx. So here's the trachea headed down to the lungs. The trachea divides into the right and left main bronchi, or primary bronchi, and they're very like the trachea, with cartilage rings holding things open. The main bronchus then will divide to serve the different lobes of the bronchi. So we have the lobar bronchi, and then the lobar bronchi further divide, creating the tertiary bronchi that are increasingly branched, smaller bronchi, all delivering air to the lungs. So the bronchi become smaller, and as they get smaller, branching and branching, they have fewer and fewer cartilage rings until we finally reach the bronchioles. The bronchioles have no cartilage rings at all, so the wall is primarily built of smooth muscle under autonomic control. So the bronchioles are able to constrict and to relax based on the needs of the body for oxygen, for bringing in oxygen or getting rid of CO2. And it's the bronchioles that when people are having an asthma attack, that occurs as the bronchioles are constricted, and it's difficult to breathe air out of the lungs as a result. So the bronchioles continue to divide until we get down to the alveolar ducts. So respiratory bronchioles are smaller bronchioles. They have fewer smooth muscle cells wrapping around them, down to the alveolar duct, which are very thin, very small, and have relatively few muscle cells wrapped around them. And so then the alveolar duct gives way to the alveolar sacs. So here is an alveolar sac. It's composed of multiple alveoli, which are little spherical, almost, outpouchings of the alveolar sacs. And each alveolar sac is surrounded by a capillary network. And it's here at the alveolar sacs that we find the respiratory membrane, the surfaces across which oxygen and carbon dioxide move between blood and these sacs are so thin that they are very delicate, and they would easily collapse just because of the surface tension of water. So water has this surface tension. Water molecules are attracted to each other by tiny little electrical charges, and the alveoli are so small and so thin that a water molecule here, so there's the oxygen and 2 hydrogens, I'll make the hydrogens dark, would be attracted to a water molecule on this side. And if that happened, then the alveolar ducts, or I'm sorry, the alveoli would be pulled closed by that electrical attraction between these water molecules. And so the cells, the epithelial tissue here is interspersed with secreting cells, and those cells put into the fluids that they secrete here, keeping the alveoli moist, they put in a material called surfactant. Surfactants, and if you look, you'll see that surfactants are found in a lot of our like dishwashing liquids. These are materials that help to break up that surface tension. They get in there and they wrap around a water molecule so that the water molecules can't be attracted to each other, and it prevents this collapse from happening. So thanks to surfactant, we don't see the alveoli collapse. Okay, so there you have it. The structures of the upper respiratory tract, the lower respiratory tract, and some information about the functioning of the respiratory system. If you have any questions, you know how to reach me.